right. So we're here with Brian Tome. So he's the founding pastor and the senior pastor of Crossroads Church. He's the author of The Five Marks of a Man. So I have that here. And he's also the founder of Man Camp. And we'll get into all that here in a minute. But I just want to say, Brian, thanks for coming on. Appreciate you.
Ryan, great to be here. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, no problem at all. And right off the bat, I love the humor you put in the beginning. Like if you're reading this far, you really love to read and all that. I think that was classic because that's me. That's me all the way. I was like, you know exactly who I am. And
Well,
then
the weird thing is, Ryan, is we write a book for men. The data is very clear. Men don't read books. So when I find someone who actually read it, I'm like, oh wow, you're one of the strange, amazing men who actually read. It's good stuff.
yeah, and maybe we can talk about that right off the bat, right? What is it that you think is the major, I guess, stumbling block for men in that regard? Like, why don't they read? Is it just boring, or what do you think?
Oh gosh, I think there's a number of things that are taking place. I don't know the exact statistics, but I've sniffed around the Christian publishing industry. I think it's 90 to 95% of all Christian books bought are by women.
Oh well,
That's because most churches are women. So you take a look at the most committed people to the Christian faith in America, it's women, it's not men. It's not the way it is with Islam. Most committed people to Islam are men,
man, yeah.
not women. So we've got a real outage in the Christian church in America of understanding how to talk to and reach men. So since there's not that many men in the church, there's not a lot of them are going to read. That's one. Another thing is pretty well documented that men are really behind the eight ball educationally. Way back in 1940 or something like that, there was way more men in higher education than women. That's flipped. Pretty soon it's going to be 70% of women in graduate school programs and 30% of men. That means that they're better educated than men. That means they're reading more than men as well. And men have gotten discouraged with the whole educational process. So unfortunately, we 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 check out of reading, many of us. And then another thing is the books that are out there that could help men, they're not really written with the masculine tongue. So I think all those things combined to say if you need to have as your day job writing a book for a man to read, that's going to be a tough slog.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that. That's some very good points. Especially the education piece. I see that with my own kids. There's a lot of women teachers. The schools, his classes, it's a lot of women, and there's just a very emasculine feel when I go in there and I speak to these teachers, and I'm in this classroom. It's like pretty stuff all over the wall and flowers, and I'm like, I don't even like this environment. So that's very interesting.
Right. Well, on top of that, since you've got the last statistic I saw was 77% of teachers were women. I don't know what the attitude of the other teachers who are men, but I do know this, that there is a system we have in America for education that's bent towards little girls. Little girls can sit longer. Little girls have more developed brains than little boys do, which is why one of the strategies that I would rethink if I was doing it over with my son is start him a year later so his brain could catch up. Um,
Oh,
it's one of the reasons why men are lagging is we just get discouraged in school because schools don't understand us. So when I was a kid, I was having 2 recesses a day coming in. I remember coming in, we were just filled with mud, and the school would just have to deal with it. There's mud all over the floor. Got to deal with it. My gosh, if you walked in with mud in the average school today, you would get expelled. But the schools back then were making accommodation for us boys who were spazzes. We weren't completely giving up on it. The system is wired towards the feminine brain, not the masculine brain.
yeah, and that makes me think too of the ADHD numbers too for boys. I mean, it's outrageous the amount of boys that are being put on medication because of their proclivity for hyperactivity and things like that. It's just, to me, it's outrageous. I actually come from a county, Dickinson County in Michigan, so I'm from the UP of Michigan, and our elementary school had the highest numbers of Adderall in the school system out of any other state in the entire country. It was wild.
Well, probably along with that, you also have the highest number of teachers that can't handle losing control. So
That's
you
a good
start
point.
losing control, and all of a sudden you're like, "Hey, they need to see a psychologist." Which, by the way, I believe that there are chemical deficiencies in some kids' brains. I believe that there is an appropriate usage of Adderall and those medications. I'm not anti-meds. It's just really hard to believe the percentage of people are on them actually need them. I think that we're just trying to get them to align and do what we want them to do when a little kid who's a spaz isn't going to do that. He's not going to accommodate you. And I think we need to be more apt to allow kids to be kids instead of, hey, let's give them some medication. It's going to mellow them out so they do exactly what I tell them to do.
Oh yeah, and especially at a young age too. Like I understand more when you hit that 8-year-old to 10-year-old. You start getting in middle school. Okay, fair. Let's make an assessment. Let's have them see a doctor, so on and so forth. But you're talking about a kid who's 4 and 5, like pre-kindergartners. Come on,
Right.
that's
Right.
wild. But I also wanted to ask you too. So in the preface here, you talked about the lack of physical skills. And I think this is kind of an interesting segue, right? Because men are very hands on, we're very visual, we love to just kind of do things. And you talked about that lack of physical skills in men. So I'm just kind of curious if you could expand on that and speak to that, because I think it's a huge gap between men in like the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, like the ideal masculine man, and then like the men of today.
Well, Ryan, we should probably back up first and just recognize men are in crisis. Men are 4 times more likely to commit suicide than women, 3 times more likely to have a mental illness than women, 2 times more likely to have an alcohol abuse or chemical abuse related incident than men. We are hurting, and there's a lot of reasons for it. One of the reasons, I believe, is that we as men are not doing things that our forefathers did. We've been given these bodies that are generally larger than a woman's body, generally stronger than a woman's body, but we don't need it to be. We're not going off to wars, which is a good thing. We're not needing to go hunt and bring stuff back to our family. We're not building our own homes on the prairie. We're not hauling a plow around our shoulder across the ground like men have done for all of time. We have these physical abilities that are hardwired into our actual DNA, but the average guy just doesn't need to use them. And so therefore we feel underutilized. We're not pushed, we're not stressed. Maybe we would have fewer medications being taken by young men if those little guys would be forced to work the farm, if they'd be forced to go out and try to find prey, forced to engage their brains and their bodies to a higher purpose. And when you look at the average guy today, not only is he not doing that, but I believe we've got this thing in our brain that sees things in a unique way. Historically, men have been really great at engineers, great at architectural things, because our brain is wired in such ways to see abstract forms and shapes and put those together. That relates to us fixing things with us doing things. There's something that happens in a man's psyche when he does a job at the house, whether it's replacing a toilet seal or whether it's fixing a lawnmower or trimming the hedges, whatever it is. You walk away, you look at that, you go, I did that. Like, I don't know you, Ryan. Most days I walk away from my job and I have nothing to turn around and look at. I've got a calendar that was full. There's some documents on my computer, but there's a sense of satisfaction I get when I put my hands to something and create something or fix something. And when the average guy doesn't know how to do that, he can't do that. And I think we lose what could be a self esteem boost for us.
Yeah, I'm thinking about all the DIY projects and stuff during the house, and you're absolutely right about that. There's definitely a really good sense of satisfaction and accomplishment when I'm able to take care of something in my own home and be like, yeah, I was able to do that. I can see the result, and then even my wife too. So maybe a little bit of a segue into marriage and being a husband, I guess. But my wife definitely reacts in a very positive way to me doing these things, especially if I do them on my own accord and she doesn't have to like ask me to do
Interesting.
them. But
Right.
there's like she's very like almost like she wants to be like, hey, good job, but she doesn't do that because we're a little bit older now and it's a little bit demeaning, I guess. But I think you get the point, right? So
Yep.
it's very interesting though that you're absolutely right about that, and I do love that aspect of
Yeah.
being a
Well,
man.
I think that goes back to our primal DNA and the history of humankind. She feels cared for, she feels protected. Like,
Yeah.
oh wow, you did something physically that helped me. That's a turn on.
Yeah, like she doesn't have to worry. If something goes wrong, she knows that I can handle the situation and be like, hey, well, at the very least, you can get the job done whether you call somebody or whatever it is. So I guess there's a sense of utility or even competence that she
Well,
feels when men do that.
yeah, I agree. I think it makes them feel safe. They feel like if an X factor is thrown, some unexpected negative situation, hey, my husband is going to be able to handle it because he has other things as well. This is, by the way, part of why there's been a number of incendiary articles written in some publications, title being "Do we really need men anymore?" I mean, that there's actual thinkers and articles about that. Do we really need men anymore? I think that's a horrible article. Is it any wonder that we're 4 times more likely to commit suicide when there's even articles about do we need men anymore? But on the other side of the equation, I think I understand what they're saying. What they're saying is if men aren't engaged physically when we have physical prowess, and they're not having to do that, what's the point? I think there's something there. Before I get offended, I should go, you're right. We have capacities that we're just not putting into play, and that we don't do those things to our spiritual and our physical unhealth.
Yeah, and what's interesting too about that? It makes me think about, so how would you kind of handle it? And I think there's a lot of young men who are dealing with this kind of situation where they have wives or they have girlfriends. I mean, I don't really believe in boys dating, but let's just go with it. And let's say that this guy has a wife who kind of brings a lot of masculine energy to the table, and she wants to kind of do these things. So, and I feel like there's a lot of tension, especially some of the men I speak with when they're coming to me for advice. They're like, "Oh, my wife has a lot of this, masculine energy she brings." So I'm just curious how you would handle that kind of situation, because I think men kind of retreat. They kind of sink back. They're like, "I don't know what to do." Like she's kind of being the man. I don't know even how to do it, even if I was to do it. So
Yeah, I would. That'd be a really good discussion to have. I'd love to have a discussion with those individuals to find out what's going on. A lot of times, what's happening is when someone says, "quote unquote," she's being the man. There's a couple things that could be happening. One, there's nothing that says a woman shouldn't fix her own toilet. You know.
agree. Yeah.
Two, are you saying that because you're really passive?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
well, if you don't want your wife to do X, Y, Z, then do it first. What I don't understand. What's the problem here?
Yeah.
I believe that there are some differences between men and women, but it gets really squirrely for me when you start saying, well, women should do this and men should do that. Well, women should certainly bear a child because I'm not physically physiologically able to do that. But beyond that, I'm really hesitant to say that a woman should do that because that's what the man should do. I don't I think a man and a woman come together, they're helpmates for each other. I don't think one has to fulfill the exact same duties in the household as the other. And if a guy is getting threatened there, it's probably because you're not pushing into what you can be bringing to the house.
Yeah, and just like one of the marks that you talk about in the book is thinking long term, and I turn that into initiative, right? Because in order to have
Yes.
initiative, be that kind of person, you have to think forward and say, what can I do? And especially if you're threatened and there's an insecurity there, like, dude, just think more in the future and jump the gun on her. If you want to do the oil and she's all gung ho about it because you failed in the past, jump on it first. Like, write it down or something in your maintenance book. I don't know. Like, it doesn't seem like a super hard problem to solve, but it's something that's recurring for me over and over again, especially with some of the younger men in the church. And that may be surprising, maybe not surprising. I don't know, but
Interesting. So you're seeing this. Guys are saying they're coming to you in real time. This isn't a
yeah,
theory. Guys are coming to you real time saying, my wife is doing things that I should do.
yeah, and maybe not in that way, but they're talking about how they're having a hard time dealing with their wife because there's like this masculine showdown, so to speak, where she's trying to she's really just acting like a man. She's doing all the things that he would do, and he feels like I guess that and I would say a lot of it, Brian, comes from he just feels less about himself because he knows he's not stepping up.
Right,
And,
right,
and then he's kind of like
right.
taking that out on her instead of being like, hey, well, what can I do to actually be a man and become a student? Like we'll
Yeah.
talk about here in a minute. But that's kind of, yeah, that's kind of how I
Well,
feel.
there certainly is from the book of Genesis. I mean, it's a curse, right? The woman is going to try to pull us down, and the man is always trying to push the woman down. So, unless in marriage we exert effort going the opposite direction, there will be a competition thing in the marriage of trying to one up the other person. And that's really, really healthy. I just don't think that there are specific tasks that mean that she's stepping over the bounds. Like my wife, one of the problems, Ryan, that guys are having troubles with is that women are out earning their husbands, and this is only going to get more and more exasperated. When you get to 70% of the population having a graduate degree and 30% being women, 30% not, who are the men, uh, the reason why we're so pro education is statistics are pretty clear. Generally, the more education you have, the more money you have. So this only exasperates the truth that regardless of whatever glass ceiling might be in corporate America, women are going to be making more money than their husbands. Now, personally, I don't think that's a problem. I wish my wife made more money than me. I would buy more guns and more motorcycles. I've got no problem with that. But the guys who I know who are healthy about it, when their wife makes more money than they do, they have to exert some energy thinking, how do I accommodate that for my male psyche? Like one guy I know, his wife was banker of the year, right? And he decided like I just can't compete with that, and I'm probably best off putting more time around the house and enabling her to go make jack for us. Well, the way he accommodates it is they bought a piece of property, and he just bush hogs the heck out of it and is always working on his property, and gets to the end of the day, looks as though I did this. He's accommodating that. Like he's giving what he needs, his emotional needs, without trying to press into a narrative that is, I must always be the one who makes the most in the house. That's my opinion. I think it can work, but it's hard to work because as men, we don't have any models. It's never been before in world history when the man hasn't been the main bread earner. That's because the world has been wired differently. Hey, it is different. Get over it. Things have changed, but we as men have got to learn how to meet our needs and adjust to the new reality without trying to pull our wives down, pull their aspirations down. At least that's what I believe.
Yeah, so I'm curious, how does that fit into the idea of the husband or the man being like a stay-at-home husband? What's your take on that? Because I think this really sparks a lot of debate, Brian. Like this one gets hot. Like there are a lot of
Yeah.
guys who really get fired up about that.
Yeah. I think the man can be the stay at home parent. I think he can be. I don't think there's anything biblically that says the man cannot be the stay at home parent. But he darn well better have some things that he does that gives him a sense of his identity beyond keeping house. And which, by the way, the same with women as well. I mean, if they don't, women like stay-at-home moms are the most antidepressed medicated people in the country. So just as we're grieved about our young boys are over medicated, so also are stay-at-home mothers. I mean, it's real. So if you're the stay-at-home parent as a dad, you've got to figure out ways that stoke your creativity, ways that, if you will, stoke your manhood, because changing diapers, as sacrificial and as godly as that may be, it's not going to do it. You're going to have to figure that out. And secondly, what you're going to have to do, just because your wife makes more money doesn't mean that you don't have a leadership voice in the home. And that's, I think, where a lot of guys
Yeah.
fall prey. They take this role and then they just abdicate all decisions to their wife because their wife's the one who's making the money. Can't work that way. Just like with my wife, when she abdicates all the decisions to me because I'm making money, it creates bitterness in her. We've had a lot of issues in our marriage about that. We are to submit to one another, mutual submission in the marriage. And just because you're the one at home, if you're a guy, that doesn't mean you have a seat. You don't have a seat at the leadership table. You do.
Yeah, that's a good point. And all of this that we're talking about, right? Also in the preface, you talked about that men today are facing all these things that no other males have faced in any period of time. So it sounds like we've already touched on a couple of them, but are there any more like that jump out to you that are like, hey, this is definitely a new frontier for men?
Yeah, another one is loneliness. The most important spiritual discipline for a man is finding and investing in friendships. Most important spiritual discipline. Now, some people would say, wait, what about the Bible? What about, hey, look, I believe in the Bible. I've read the Bible more than you. I know the Bible better than you. I'm not talking about you, Ryan. Maybe you do, but generally speaking,
Probably.
someone starts pushing me like, man, I'm pro Bible guy. I'm a big Bible guy. I've got my reading plan. I'm doing again this year for getting through the Bible. I'm a big Bible guy, but understand Jesus gave more talking and modeling about friendships than he did about actually reading the scriptures. He has 12 guys who he's doing life with. He gives us all these instructions about loving your neighbor as yourself, forgiving one another. All of these things are in his life. And I think that we ignore those things because we're just trying to read the Bible, which we should. Read. But what's unique about now versus the time of Jesus or at any time in American history is there's no natural connective tissue in our culture that creates male friendships. We used to have it. There used to be softball leagues.
Yeah.
There used to be bowling leagues. There used to be Elks Club, Moose Club. There used to be all these, those things are gone. Like they're gone. You might be able to find a bowling league or a beer softball league somewhere, but it wasn't like it was where like everybody was in it. Or even dads would take their sons to Little League. Kids don't play Little League anymore. So therefore, dads aren't meeting other dads at Legal League. All the things that we as men used to lean into to know another man, to laugh with another man, to encourage another man, those things are gone. And so for a man right now to figure out how to come against the worst epidemic of our lifetime, which is loneliness, that guy's going to figure out how to figure it out because nothing in our culture is going to help us do that. And that's new. You could just accidentally have friendships before, like many of us did in college. If you went to college, you could just accidentally have friendships in college. If you were in a fraternity or people on your floor, it would just happen. It does not happen for the average guy, which is why he's hurting.
Yeah, and my biggest perspective on that, Brian, is that I feel like it has a lot to do with technology. Because, like you said, one of the
Right.
biggest models that I've seen of male friendships comes from like what you mentioned. When I was playing all these sports, my main sport was wrestling, and all these dads, they were always so coordinated. Like when we were going to a tournament and it was a long drive, all the fathers would be like, "Hey, we're going to meet up at Junction O." And we're all gonna drink our coffee and smoke our cigarettes, whatever, and then we're gonna hit the road together. And if we stop, we're all stopping together, and we're gonna refill, and we're gonna have that smoke, and then we're gonna, you know what I mean? At the tournament, we're gonna link back up again, and then the whole thing was a very coordinated effort by these men. And the wives were doing the same thing, right? But the men were like in charge of it. They're like, "Hey, we're gonna make sure this is a fun event, not for the kids, but for us too." And I don't see that anymore, and I feel like
Right.
technology has a lot to do with that. These men, these fathers, families, they're all in their own little worlds. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, I got my own little technological space that I fit in, and if anybody encroaches in that, it's like I only
Yeah.
have a little bit of time for I only have so much social energy before I have to tap out and be like, hey, that's enough interaction for today. I gotta go back home, and I don't understand that. I'm a
I was that's really funny, Ryan. I was laughing because you're talking about guys getting to smoke on a road trip. I grew up in an era when I played Little League. My coach smoked cigarettes inside the dugout. God bless America.
yeah,
We got to get back to the way America used to be. Oh my gosh, it was so funny. But yeah, you're exactly right. We are technology dependent. I am. I love tech. I love it. Part of the good thing about it is to go back to the changing a toilet bowl seal is you can learn how to do that on YouTube. Anything you need to know as a guy, you can find it on YouTube. The downside of that is we used to have to call a buddy to help us and tell us what to do. And that was one of the things that brought relationships together. Hey, you've never done a deck, or I've never done a deck. You have? Would you come over and just help me get started on this deck? Hey, I've never done this. Would you help me do that? Guys used to do that with one another. We don't do it anymore because of the technology. And actually, we even call our community our Facebook friends, or we call our community whatever forum we're on. that is not the same as somebody knowing your name and looking you in the eye and having a tear in their eye when they hear about your pain. That's not the same as when your wife goes in and has a stroke, like happened to mine a few years ago, and you got four guys who show up in the parking lot with a six-pack of beer, and they just sit there in the parking lot saying, "Hey, man, we're praying for you, and as soon as you can, whatever's right, just come down here. We got you." You know,
Yeah.
I just almost cried just talking about it. I'm rich with those relationships, and the average guy is living in relational poverty, and it's really sad.
Yeah, and now knowing that, right? What because even I've struggled with this in my life. You know, there are still I'm still actively searching for more of mentorship type things because what I found is I'm 29, so a lot of men my age group. I don't know. Maybe this is a me thing, so it's like a personal problem, maybe, but I have a hard time relating. Because I'm a very ambitious guy. I've really been actively pursuing reading and maturity, and I got two kids, so like I feel like I'm not in a very similar hole, like a foxhole, as a lot of these other kids my age, right? But yeah, even I struggle with that. So how can men cultivate more male friendships, knowing that we have not the same ease or like ease of access to men like we did in the past?
Well, it's a two-part question or two-part answer. Um, Let me tell you one of my strange hobbies, Ryan. I'm a pastor of a large church, and when other pastors, when they morally fail, when they tap out, when they get fired, I always say, what happened? What happened? I want to know what happened because I want to learn for myself. How do I keep myself from learning the same mistakes? Now, I know enough people and have enough connections that when some of these guys DQ, I can find out the situation. And every pastor I know who's DQ'd, there's two things that they all have in common. You want to guess what they are?
Probably no accountability. Um, I want to say something to do with I don't know internet, maybe pornography seems to be a heavy one.
Okay, both of those are partially true because they relate to what I found. Um, no male accountability. Yes, sort of. Men accountability groups were really big in the 80s and 90s with Promise Keepers and um, basically male accountability groups. All the ones I was in, all eventually evolved to be anti-whack off groups. It was like the main topic of conversation was, I masturbated. Did you masturbate? Oh, sorry, you can't do it. Okay, we're gonna call you every morning, so or every night, so you don't masturbate. I'm gonna. There's some. To be clear, I'm anti-masturbation, anti-porn. Okay, I just want to be really clear, but also to be clear, simply showing up so I don't masturbate or showing up so we toe the line morally. That's not enough to keep bonds there, right? What you're saying, though, that I really agree with, and what I found is all those guys who DQ'd, they lacked deep male friendships inside their church. Now, out of that comes accountability,
Yeah.
okay? But the point isn't accountability and I got to find a friend. The point is I need friendship and then I get accountability out of that. So that's one. The second one, and you mentioned porn, I believe the reason why porn is so popular for us as men today isn't just because it's free, isn't just because it's easily accessible, isn't just because it feeds into a primal sex drive that we have, isn't just because men are visually stimulated. All of these things all come together. But show me a guy who has a real porn problem, and I'll show you a guy who doesn't have a hobby. That's the second thing. They don't have anything else that captures their imagination. They don't have a project happening in the garage. They're not researching hunting gear. They're not, whatever. Those two things. And for men, when we have a hobby, whatever it is, hunting, fixing cars, uh, finger painting, whatever it is, photography,
Fishing.
when we have a hobby, what do you want to do with hobbies? You want to do them with somebody else because somebody else can figure out how to do it better. Somebody else can do it with you. Somebody else brings their knowledge base. So when a man doesn't have a hobby, he's also not going to have friends. because men develop friendships when they're doing things with other men, specifically when they're doing recreational pursuits.
Yeah, wow. That's so true. That is so true. And because at times I even thought myself as kind of weird in that regard because I love to fish and I'm always looking for like who can I invite to go
Right.
because fishing by yourself, it's not that it's not fun, it's not interesting, it's just not as fun, right? Because
Yes.
those times when you're waiting, you're just kind of like, hey, yeah, it's beautiful, but when you've been to the same lake 3 times, like, okay, picture
Right.
scene. Now I need someone to talk to. So that's interesting. But
Well,
here's our question for you.
it's not hold on. It's not just there the fishing with your buddy. It's also the planning of the next fishing trip. It's
Yeah.
also the
The drive.
talking and fantasizing about what gear you want to buy. It's also the reliving over your last fishing trip. It's also, I mean, there's, yeah, it's all types of things that all tie into that.
Yeah. So, and I wanted to ask you too. So, in that situation, like me, for example, so if you run into a situation where you don't have anybody to fish with, right, then where do we go? Because again, I've been struggling with this for a while. I've been looking for mostly older male friends, but just more male friendships in general. And a lot of it, maybe it's my fault again because I'm looking for a very specific type of person, right? And maybe that's just a
Right.
me thing. But in that regard, right? What if a man really feels like he's at a loss? Like, where do I go to find these male friendships? Like, if I have this hobby and I don't know anybody, how do I guess, bridge the gap between, I guess, people I don't know?
Well, I don't know much about the fishing world. I have a very close friend who's into fishing deep, and I'm not. So it's actually one of the dangers of our friendship. Is like if we don't find something else, we're probably just going to break up because I mean he loves fishing. I don't. We used to venture motorcycle ride together. He got out of that. We hunt together. He's not sure he wants to do that anymore. So when it comes to the fishing thing, I can't speak specifically the fishing thing, but here's what I've learned with another one of my hobbies, and this has happened for me. I'm rehabbing a 1978 Jeep CJ7, which is the exact same type of vehicle I had in college. I've always said, oh man, I got rid of that vehicle. I want to get that same year, same vehicle, same engine, restored from frame up sometime. And I'm doing that right now. And when I did that, I found forums on Facebook, CJ restoration. I can ask any question. They're very, very helpful. But what also has happened, people find out that I'm working on a Jeep thing and they're car restoration guys. And I've gotten a new friend. His name is Peter. Now, Peter's never done a Jeep, but he's done a GTO. And he just found out that I'm doing this and I live like 2 miles away from him. So he's calling me up. He's coming over and I don't know what to do with this thing. Oh, I'm going to come over. He's coming over. We built a friendship because of that. So I think when you get into something, you find the little alleys of where guys exist and you just start working those alleys. I'm sure there's something like that with fishing. Is there a fishing club? Is there a fishing something that you could look at? Is there I don't is there a post on your social media? Use social media. Hey, I'm a fisher and I'm looking at this new reel. Anybody have any ideas this new reel? See who bites. And maybe one of those guys you're actually going to start a relationship with.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's a very good point. Yeah, and some of that I wonder how much it has to do with. I get. I would say maybe like time management, right? Because when you have, I would say maybe this is not so much of an issue for older men who their kids are a little bit older and stuff, and they had more of a career, more time to kind of figure out their life situation. But what I think maybe do you feel like maybe it's a time management thing, like guys getting into hobbies because we talked about hobbies and the lack of hobbies and how this kind of leads men to a weird place. So do you feel like that's maybe true for some of these guys? Like they don't really have a whole lot of skills yet in just like self management, right? Like
Yeah.
managing their life and their schedule and things. So when they try to add things, they're just at a loss. I'm like, I don't
Right.
even know how this fits in or how to plan this.
Right.
Or, right? Do you feel like that's
Yeah, totally. No, that's a good call, Ryan. I'm glad you asked that because I've got to go back and try answering these questions as a 35-year-old, which I was once, who had 3 kids and demanding jobs and didn't have financial margin, and not the 58-year-old I am right now with an empty nester and more disposable income I've ever had in my life, right? So that's a really good point. So as I think back to when I was 35 and other 35-year-old guys I know right now, I think I would say a couple things. One, don't feel guilty about wanting to have fun. You and I, Ryan, are wired for pleasure. That's why we have taste buds. That's why God has enabled for men sex to feel good where it doesn't feel good for many other parts of His created world. Right? We got to get over that. Some guys will not find a hobby because they feel guilty that it sounds frivolous, that it's selfish. No, it's not frivolous and selfish. It's not. In fact, if you don't do it, you're going to fall into something that's really unhealthy. So I would do that. I would say that. Second thing I would say is there was things that I thought I was too busy for a hobby when I was 35, and really I was too deluded about how important I was. I
Mm.
took meetings I didn't have to take. I worked evenings that didn't produce the fruit that I needed it to, you know, and I wish I was wise with my time. If you if you have Netflix and you use Netflix, let alone Netflix, Amazon Prime, let alone Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, let alone Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, Hulu, you know where I'm going here. Like most dudes are binging some show right now. I like binging shows, no problem. I do it. But if you're binging shows, you have time. When you get away from whatever you're watching on your TV, you're probably not feeling as restored as you would be if you had a hobby. So give yourself the freedom to do that. And the third thing I would say is money. You're just going to have to talk with your wife and say, honey, I know we're on really thin margins right now, but I think to serve you best and to affair proof our marriage and to keep me from doing something unhealthy, if we could find some money in our budget to apportion to me putting money into a hobby, I think our family will be the better for it.
Yeah, that's a good call, especially with the conversation. I feel like that may be a point of contention too for some men. They don't want to just straight up ask, and then they get them into a place where they're like, "Well, I just have to do it," and then it starts fights, and then it gets weird. But
Well, and then they hide it. Then
yeah, and they hide it.
they start spending the money, and their wife doesn't know it, and then they have a financial crisis because now they got credit card debt. Yeah, it's sticky.
Yeah, no, that's a great call too, Brian. Because I stepped into that. I stepped on my poncho in that regard too, and I never put ourselves in like crazy debt or anything. But I got to this place where I didn't want to hear it from my wife, so I was like, you know what, I'll just go do like something even super simple and small. Like I would go to McDonald's for lunch or something, right? So I just got out of the military, and I'd go to McDonald's for lunch and just grab a burger, right? And if I came home with the bag, I would like try to shove it in the trash. I just didn't want to do it, right? I was like, I just
Right,
don't want to hear it,
right.
man. And then I got to a point where I was like, you know what? After being married for like 6 years, I think it was like the 6 year mark or so. I was like, you know what, man? Why am I embarrassed to buy McDonald's? Like, you know what I mean? Like, this is crazy. And so I kind of, I guess, on my own, kind of got out of it. But I feel like maybe there's some guys that still deal with that. But that's a great point. It's a very interesting.
I'm laughing because I identify with your pain. When Lib and I had like no money, but I was working at the church and I had an expense account for lunches, not lunches for myself, but lunches with volunteers or staff members. I was going out to cool place for lunch all the time and I wasn't paying. The church is paying, right? And then I'd come home and she'd be like, "Oh, must be nice to go out and have a nice lunch." And she's right. She had a right to at least have words about it. I didn't know what to do about it. I'm like, "Honey, I'm sorry. We don't have the money for you to go out to nice lunches too. At least I'm not paying for this, but I at least recognize the tension that there is this thing we have in marriage, and it's tough to navigate through."
Yeah, and and going back to one of the big things that really kills me is video games. I don't know if you want to speak to that, but this is one where I'm really trying to figure this out because again, men my age and even older, talking about this game and that game, and they're playing hours a day, and now they're, all these aspirations for, well, maybe I'm going to get into streaming, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, because
Right.
I didn't grow up with that, so I had four brothers, and they all played the video games, and I was like the youngest, so when I tried, I would either get beat up and kicked out, so I just got to the point where I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go play outside, and that kind of
Yeah.
became my personality. So I guess what is your take on that, the whole video game thing? For me, maybe it's personality, maybe it's just I don't know.
I think I would put video games in the same place I would put streaming streaming shows in the same place I would put watching YouTube in the same place I'd put playing blackjack at a casino when you have whatever your budget is to lose. I think all those things are fine. I think those things are fine. I don't think I do a lot of those things, but we have to say, if the video game or any one of those things, if that's my main point of recreation, I just don't think it's going to make you a fuller you. I don't walk when I go to the casino like once every other year because I'm in Vegas for something and I pop down and I have a great time with it. I don't I don't leave the blackjack table, even if I won, going, man, I'm more equipped for the world right now. Woo! Yeah, let's go. I don't. It's just like when you leave time doing pornography. No one leaves pornography going, woo! Oh man, I am ready. No, you're just like lessened a bit. And so I'm not a video game guy, but I would anticipate it's the same thing with video games. You're looking at a screen. You're not having brotherhood with somebody. You're not getting to know somebody else better. You're not having laughs and then laughing about the last laugh you had the next time you see the person. You don't have a person who can show up when you're in crisis. You don't have ideas that help you in your job. Like when I hunt, that's one of my hobbies. When I hunt, it's very difficult. I do it with other people, and I normally learn something that equips me in my job. It pushes me forward. I don't. So again, to your question, I don't think video games are bad. Fine, I don't think they're bad. I just don't think that that's going to be the thing that's going to be a hobby that's going to take you to a new level or really flush out the toxins of your life.
Yep. Yeah, this is one of the only categories where I ever tell guys that it's kind of, I would say, go on how you feel. Usually, I never ever say that, like base it on your feelings. But in this regard, I usually tell people that, like, look, if it feels bad and it feels wrong, like then you know it's wrong and you need to fix it, right? There's no point of continuing to beat yourself up and ruin your integrity because you know you're wrong. Like it's not good for you. You know it's causing problems. Like just fix that. And kind of on the same regard too, I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned. That age is not the separating factor between boys and men. And I really like that because I'm constantly telling my son, he's 11 now, I'm constantly
Yeah.
telling him that maturity doesn't just come out of nowhere. Like it's not a guarantee of life. Like when you're born, it's not like, hey, you're supposed to mature. It's something you have to actively pursue by trying to figure out who you are and where you're at, and then say, where do I want to be next? So I'm curious if you expand on that, the
Yeah.
separate.
I think it's really important to learn from history, which of course the old line is if there's anything we learn from history, it's that we don't learn anything from history. Most people think that today is reality and I just create my own reality today and I don't want to be on the wrong side of history. I think to really be embracing not being on the wrong side of history, we've got to look at history because someone's right now on the wrong side of history, and we'll be forever because history speaks very, very clearly to this. As it relates to that was all a big preamble for what you just asked me. What did you just ask me? It was a bit. Oh, okay. It was shoot, Ryan. What did you just ask me?
The age, the separator
Oh, okay, got
between boys and men. Yeah.
Thank you. As it relates to history, history is very clear. Whenever a male has been able to have an erection and an ejaculation, culture expected that person to be a man because they could procreate.
Oh wow.
That's the history of the world. The whole term adolescence didn't even come out, I think it was till 1900. And that term related to maybe a awkward phase for a year. Well, now adolescence is like 15 to 25, right? What I'm saying here is that we're embracing a construct that tells us that we can be a man when we can drink or when we're 18 or when we go to the military or when we earn our first X amount of dollars. No, that's not it. That's not it. There are young males who are men who may your son at 11 may be a man, not just because he whatever's happened with him with ejaculations and stuff, but if he has these marks of being a man versus being a boy, I'd start treating him as a man. And I don't think our culture is really up for having this discussion or calling out our young males because people rise to the level of your expectation. Well, in our culture, when we expect young boys to be doofuses, young boys to
Yeah.
be irresponsible, well, guess what? They're going to be doofuses and irresponsible. But when you expect your young boy to make a contribution to society, make a contribution to your family, to actually bring money in for your family, to actually plow fields like young males have done for all of history, we need to stop giving our young males a pass on mature behavior.
Yeah, and I'm right in line with that. I'm big on standards, and I think for me, when I was growing up, I like early on, I decided, and I guess my dad kind of prompted it, but he talked a lot about how, because again, I was a big wrestler, and he talked about if I want to be a better wrestler, I need to just be a better person. He's like, there's a direct link between
I
being a
like
more
that.
mature person and being good at athletics, right? Because I guess there's something, he probably talked a lot about, emotional and the intellectual part of it. But that's a very good point that you make, and I agree with it wholeheartedly. That the standard and the way we talk to kids has to change. Because I even other parents, right? They kind of look at me and they're like, "Oh, you're doing such a great job with your kids." And I'm like, "Look, I just don't treat my kid like a little baby. Like I try
Right,
to have age appropriate
right.
conversation, and that's based on me. There's no objective standard for what that is, but." I talk to my 11-year-old as if I would be talking to myself. So I'm like, look, dude, here's how I see
Yes.
it. So either figure it out and meet this, or let's have a conversation about it and tell me how you feel. You're not going to hurt my feelings. If I'm offended by what you say, right, then I have a
Yep.
problem. Then I have a problem.
Yes.
So, and I think there's just a lot of guys where they're putting their kids, like you said, in these little like lower categories and expecting them to come out of that category on their own. It's like, I don't know how you think they're going to do that. They have no reference for it.
Well, right. And it's how do we confer trust to our kids? So, like what I do with my son is I gave him sharp objects when he was really young
Yeah.
because I wanted to communicate to him, I trust you with this. Now, if I could trust him, it'd be stupid to give a 2-year-old a sharp knife. But I was giving him sharp knives as a really young guy. I had him responsible for mowing the lawn when he was like 8 or something like that, and other parents are like, oh my gosh, no, you're going to chop your toes off. Well,
Yeah.
that's a concern. You got to make sure that they're okay, wearing the right footwear and everything. But I wanted to confirm on my son, and the same thing my daughters, like, I believe you're beyond what culture says that you can be. When my kids could call 911, I said, you have now qualified to be your own babysitters, and we're not paying anybody any longer. That's all I need to do. Call 911, you're good to go.
Yeah.
and, I,
Fair
and
enough.
I'm going to trust you. I felt like I always wanted to push my kids and tell them, I believe you're further along than culture says that you are. That's when our kids grow up.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. So how, because what age, that really makes me think about how a lot of laws have changed in that regard too, right? That I think kind of keep kids and parents in that category, right? Because the worry and the fear is there as a parent that if I leave my 12-year-old with my 6-year-old as an example, and I know he's capable and I know nothing's going to happen because I trust him and I've seen him, his level of competence, but let that get out and parents are worried like I'm going to go to jail and all these kind of
Right.
things, right? So I guess speak to that because I think that's something that's very interesting as well.
It's a risk for sure. The world is not going to understand that. They didn't understand it when I was growing up or when I was a parent of young kids. But even there, I chose to in the proper situation spank my children. Wasn't a lot. If you choose to spank, which is really effective for the right child at the right time, if you choose to do it, you should have to do it very rarely. Like I don't think I spanked any of my kids more than 5 times, right? But even then, when I was doing that, I knew that if word of that got out, it would be really bad, really shameful. And now society has progressed even further to basic parenting techniques are just out of vogue. So yeah, you're gonna be taking a risk, and you've got to deal with: are you up for the approval of the masses, or are you up for the development of your child? I say choose the development of your child.
Yeah, because I'm in line with that. I grew up with my dad. He never really punished me at all. Like I don't never remember sitting in timeout, being grounded, put in my room, none of that stuff. He was a big proponent of just sitting me down and really just telling me, I was being a really horrible person. That
And it
was
worked. And it worked for you.
yes, oh
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. There you go. No need to spank with a child like you. Not at all.
yeah.
Great.
Yeah, he was very good at that too, man. And this is something I've tried to adopt as well. And I just realized that maybe it was his dad that did that with him. So he kind of, I chose to spank, like you said, a very, very limited basis for very specific things. But I've always tried to be like my dad in that regard because he just had a way of making you feel like absolute crap about what you did, and just making you change your ways. But That's really interesting because timeouts are ridiculous. I think, telling your kid like, no, no, that's bad. That's ridiculous. They don't understand that. They don't know what you're talking about. So I think that's very interesting. And then, before I know we're kind of getting close to time here. You also talked about the primal path, right? Like this ancient path and how to connect with that. And I think we're kind of going on this up ramp here in that direction. Because after discipline, it's like, okay, discipline's one aspect of kind of raising kids up from boy to man and connecting with that path. But what are some other ways that we can kind of get our sons or even ourselves if we don't feel like maybe we're man enough yet? Because I know I struggle with that sometimes. Being a younger father, I had kids earlier, due to mistakes and things like that. But I don't regret it. It's been awesome. But sometimes it's like, man, I don't feel like I'm really like man enough. Or I'm maybe appropriate age. I don't know, like maybe not mature enough. But I guess to speak to that, like connecting with that primal path and trying to get yourself on the right path, I guess.
Yeah, this is a hard one to answer, Ryan, because I don't think it's an easy answer. When people talk about toxic masculinity, I always want to say, how are you defining toxic masculinity? If you're defining toxic masculinity as having to always power up on somebody to get your way, like, oh yeah, right, that's toxic. That's masculinity. Yeah, 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 yeah. If you're talking about someone who hunts and drives a truck, it well, if I drive a truck and I hunt, I'm not a toxic man, but but if I was hunting and I was driving a truck only to have people think that I was a man, then that could be toxic, right?
Mm,
And I think that's where we come as men. We are trying to prove ourselves that we're a man, and every little cultural niche in our country has different rules how to prove you're a man. Maybe in certain elite places in New England, the way you prove yourself as a man in that area is to read more books than the next person and to be very, very sensitive as a male. And people go, oh, that's man. Maybe down south, the way you prove that you're a man is you do hunt and have a pickup truck with mutters or something like that. I think every little niche culture has ways that they're exalting manhood. And if we're in one of those cultures, we're going to want to play by those rules. When I was in high school, the way you were a man is that you underage drank and you smashed mailboxes with baseball bats. That's the way you proved your man. And so I did that. That was toxic, very toxic. So what does that bring us to now? What if I'm a 40-year-old guy who still feels like I'm not sure if I'm a man? And what's missing with the 45-year-old guy who's uncertain about that and the 15-year-old male who's uncertain about that is we're missing a father figure who tells us we're a man.
mm,
That's the problem we have. As soon as a guy feels like he has to show that he's a man, then the battle's lost because men don't ever try to prove that they're a man. They just are who they are. But we have to get validation from a father or a father figure that cements in our heart where we say, okay, I'm a man. Jesus gets spoken to 3 times by his heavenly father in the Bible. 3 times, at least 3 times is recorded. It's interesting that God, it's never recorded that God ever told him what to do. He never tells him, okay, now go to this town here in Capernaum. Now go to the next town. We don't hear God ever saying, okay, here's who your 12 disciples are going to be. We don't hear him giving if he did, he may have, but we don't hear that anywhere. But we hear him telling him 3 times, speaking to him. 2 times, it's the exact same thing. This is my son in whom I'm well pleased. He tells him that at his baptism, and he tells him that at the transfiguration when he's got Peter, James, and John there who witnessed the fact 2 times. So, what this means is if Jesus needed his heavenly father to tell him that he was doing well and he was proud of him, so do we. And some of us have got fathers who are just not equipped to tell us that. They're not going to tell us that.
mm.
And that's sad. That's really a bummer. You, Ryan, that's the most important thing you can ever tell your son. He never grows weary of it. Hey, son, You're doing great. I'm proud of you. I say you're a man. That's the most important conversation any male can ever hear from another male. When we haven't gotten that, we need to somehow pray and get around people who may bestow on us that blessing to fill in the cracks of our heart. Because I believe until we hear that from somebody who's a true man, we got cracks that are just not going to mend.
Yeah, and it seems like, now that you bring it up, it makes me think that the only times I usually do hear other parents, talk to their kids about that kind of thing, it's usually in regards to some kind of athletic thing, and it's usually not very often in regards to just life situations.
Yes,
You could have a kid who just does something absolutely to exceed your expectations when you're just out in public, and they just totally ignore it, like it's a normal thing. And like, yeah, it's normal, it's expectation, like we talked about earlier. But at the same time, affirming that, like it sounds like what you're saying is that affirming that's going to go a long way. It's going to encourage him to continue to do these things and
right.
exceed those expectations, because otherwise it seems like maybe they only think that they can do a good job when they perform well
Right.
in a
Well,
perform.
that's a really good point. The first time Jesus hears that, he's at his baptism. He's done no public teaching at that point. He's performed no big miracles for the public at that point. He may have had some miracles earlier on that aren't recorded, but those big wow moments, they haven't happened yet. And so when God says that to him, he's speaking to the totality of his character.
Yeah.
If the only time we're affirming our children are when they got a good grade on a test, then we're going to miss it. We're going to make them accomplishment junkies. We've got to look at the totality of their character. Like, hey, son, you got an A on your report card. That's great. Let me tell you, I see you performing A work all the time in things that people don't notice. I got to tell you, holistically, where you are in life, you are an A. You're crushing it, son. I am proud of you. Well done. It's got to be based on those things, not just the compliments for the behaviors we like.
Yeah, yeah, because then it seems like you're only teaching them and raising them up to, like you said, just be performers in outside things. Like, where's the raising in character? And
Yeah.
you can put them into certain things all you want to, and say, oh, this is a challenge. This is like, I guess probably the time frame in which you grew up. It's like, oh, this is character building. Okay, but they don't know that. I don't think so. I don't think a kid sits there and goes, "Well, I'm shoveling this for character." No, you have to tell them that that's what's happening. I think that's why that saying kind of came about. And in all of this, it really brings me back to, you talked about becoming a student of manhood. And I think so. Kind of, it sounds like it's what we're kind of speaking to now, but maybe you could elaborate on that as well. Like, what would a guy have to do? Because obviously the necessity is there. Like, if you're a father, you should probably, and you got a son, like you just definitely study this stuff. Even the daughter, right? But yeah, I guess speak to that. Like, what is a journey of being a student of manhood look like? Like, where should they go? Where should they begin? What kind of things should they be reading?
Yeah, well, for sure, if you're a student of manhood, the greatest thing you could read is any book I've written because that's the ultimate authority. That's the ultimate authority on all truth related to masculinity. Period. Period. Now, I'd be hesitant to tell people. I mean, there's certainly great books out there. I mean, John Eldridge's stuff has been classic and really really strong. You also got some of the ancient greats like Steve Farrar. Steve, a friend of mine who died several years ago, did a book called Point Man. You got Stu Weber's done some stuff. Those are all sort of Christian books, and I mentioned these are Christian books because there's not a lot in the secular market that's really talked about manhood, which is maybe why men are struggling so much. There was an old book decades ago called Iron John by Robert Bly that is, as far as I know, the one of the only ones that touched on this. There's a couple authors recently that are starting to get some play, but aside from reading those books, I think what's most likely and helpful for the average guy is to do your own internal inventory of who you respect and trust. And I mean, who are the men that you know that you want to be like? Who are the men that had an influence on you when you were growing up? The biographies that you read, if you read a biography or you watch a biography on TV of a certain man, who are those that stick out to you? Of the people that you see in the Bible that inspire you. What you do is you start looking at all these and you say, what is it about this guy that inspires me? What is it about this person's life that makes us still talk about him decades after he's dead? And that's the work I did. And the conclusions I came to are the 5 things I saw, 5 marks of a man. But even if you don't believe in those things, I think a man should be asking himself regularly, what is it about this guy's life that sets him apart? Be a student of what's right in front of you, more so than getting a new book reading list.
Yeah, fair enough. And you brought it up. So if you could, I think this would be very helpful for everyone as well, and a plug for your book as well. It's just briefly kind of explain the 5 marks and what those are.
All right, so the 5 marks uh, pit boys against men. As you said earlier, there's 15-year-old men and there's also 45-year-old boys. So there's 5 of them. They're not in numerical order. All of us are going to have a weak spot, at least one weak spot in these, but all of us go, yes, 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 yes. One is this. Men have a vision, boys live day to day. Men have something out on the horizon that's going to be difficult and take time to accomplish. Boys aren't concerned about that. They want an easy, happy day. 2, men work and boys play. I believe in play. I believe in pleasure. I believe in hobbies, as we already talked about here. But I do those things to equip me to work. I do those things to recover from work. The point of my life is work. The point of my life is not play. Adam and Eve were put in the Garden of Eden, and they were put there to work long before sin entered the world. Fruitless work is a curse of the devil, not work itself. 3, men are team players. Boys always want to be MVP. Boys want to be all-time quarterback. They want to win the individual award, where men are about being on the team. This is why we keep pushing marriage off. This is why young males are not asking girls out. We're ill-equipped to operate in team. The greatest team you'll ever be on is the team of marriage. Marriage is the perfect example of how you can be a man. You build into somebody else, they build into you, and you do it for the rest of your life. Jesus was in a team of 12 guys. He was also in a team called the Trinity. As men, we will embrace a team work ethic. 4, men are protectors, boys are predators. Boys take, take, take. All they want is what they want, and they take, take, take. Men protect. We look out for the hurting. We look out for the impoverished. We look out for the person who's at risk sexually. We protect people. We don't just prey on people. We protect them physically. We protect them financially. We protect them mentally with wisdom. We protect them emotionally. And then finally, men take a minority position. Boys always want to be in the majority. Men realize that when I'm a man, there's not going to be a lot of people like me. The people I vote for are always going to lose. The way I manage my money will never be understood by financial consultants. The way I raise my kids will not be approved of by popular culture, and that's okay. I get it. I understand it, because popular culture is run by and inhabited by boys. Boys always need to be in the majority. They need popular opinion to be on their side. In fact, they make their decisions based on what popular opinion will do. Men, we're comfortable with the minority position. We go upstream.
Awesome, thank you. And I think real quick too. I know we're really running out of time here, but a quick plug for Man Camp, because I just recently heard about Man Camp. I was looking for a summer camp for me and my boys to go to during the summer, and I came across Man Camp, and I don't remember, because I think I kept seeing that there was a father son for Man Camp, but I don't remember seeing the registration and all that for it on the website there. But yeah, quick plug for Man Camp.
Yeah, so Man Camp happens every year. Our first one's come up in a couple weeks, so it's probably too late for your listeners to um, sign up unless this podcast goes live tomorrow or something like that. It's
Yeah.
when does it go live? Your podcast?
So usually I publish on Thursdays, but this one will go out earlier for sure because it's
Oh,
earlier.
okay. Well, you could still come. There's, I think every state in the union is represented, 45, 46 states. We have right now 2,500 guys showing up. It's a rugged camping experience. It'll push you spiritually and give you a lot of fun too. So that started as a need to give guys a campfire situation, to be able to get to know other guys, sit around the campfire, bond with guys, have fun, do stupid games, all that stuff. It's probably the most important thing I do with my life, quite frankly. And we also do father-son camp. Father-son camp runs in the spring, and that's for any father and any son. And it's a very similar thing, but it's not age-gated. Man camp is age-gated. You have to be at least 18 to go to. Father-son camp is any father, any son.
Fair enough. And then last thing before we wrap up here is, if you could give any young man out there some just like no kidding, or just men in general, I guess, no kidding, gut punching advice, what would that be?
Oh man. make just about everything in your life is small potatoes and not to be worried about. We stress about too many things. Most of it doesn't matter, and God doesn't care either.
Wow.
Really, he just does. He doesn't care what car you drive. Believe it or not, I don't think he even cares what job you take. He cares how you operate in your job. But I think we get stressed out about way, way, way too many things, and we don't get amply concerned about the things that are going to define our life 10 years from now. Don't sweat don't sweat the small stuff. Most of it is small. And when you come up to a crossroad, you're not sure whether to go right or left, and it feels like this could be a really big deal. Make the decision on the basis of, what will I be thankful I did 20 years from now?
Mm.
Which was the bigger adventure? Which has the opportunity to make a bigger splash? You do that, you're going to be setting yourself up well for the future, and you're going to have a great life, while everybody else just tries to get by with the easiest life possible, which never makes a great life.
Wow. Hey, well, like I said, be respectful for your time. So we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. Brian, I really thank you for being on. Thank you for sending me the book. Thanks for letting everybody know about Man Camp. And so how can they get your book? Is it gonna be on Amazon, or where can they get their
Yes,
website?
Amazon. Amazon is easy. Bookstores everywhere, but Amazon for sure. And you could also go to briantome.com. I've got the book coming out, a new take on the book. I've got the 5 Marks for a Man tactical guide, which is a way for you to do this with other guys. It's kind of a cool thing. And
Yeah.
coming up soon, at some point in the future, I'll also have a 5 Marks for a Man devotional as well.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, that wraps it up. Thank you, Brian, very much.
My pleasure, Ryan. Thanks for having me.